Good morning, Bitcoins. Today is Wednesday, October 31st, 2018. And you know what that means. It's 10 years to the day that Satoshi Nakamoto released the Bitcoin white paper. Why do you know about it? Because all the social media guys love round numbers, and they've been telling you about Satoshi's white paper. Let's read some great quotes from Twitter. Kevin Loacek says, 10 years already. The next decade will be as bumpy as the previous one. Can't wait for the drama, the rage quits, but also the inevitable end of money as we know it today. Happy birthday, Bitcoin paper, and thank you, Satoshi, for changing my life. Check out Hodl Hodl. They say happy Halloween and happy birthday, Bitcoin. Rhett Creighton produced Bitcoin's birth certificate and had the Genesis block, the raw hex version, including the words, "The Times, 3rd January 2009, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks." As if Bitcoin was created with a purpose. Matthew Haywood wrote in with a birthday poem. Here we go. 10 years ago, the white papers released. Is Satoshi still out there, alive or deceased? Many lost money with the fall of Mt. Gox. Trust me, says Jesus, we need bigger blocks. Suits in New York said it's miners that voted. With SegWit 2X, our objections were noted. Shaolin Fry released code. Let us stand up and fight. The power of nodes would soon come to light. Samson made hats and others, they bought them. This was one way the community fought them. Nodes were updated, articles written. Luke Jr. fought hard. That was a given. The Brand 17 wrote a wonderful piece about money and nodes and value increase. SegWit went live, free from its captor. The price soared high off community rapture. 20, no 6. Does the price really matter? Be it low or high, I prefer the latter. Scammers bamboozled, released code under patent. The extent of the lie seems painfully blatant. Lightning won't work. It's all vaporware. Yet the network expands with tremendous fanfare. Bitcoin, you say? You're a maximalist. Giacomo doesn't care if his slides leave you pissed. Crime, terror, and now global warming. Bitcoiners ignore the latest FUD warning. So 10 years have passed with a whole load of drama. The market is cool. The price has never been calmer. Many great thinkers share with a tweet, but I'm not really sure I could live off of just meat. A Bitcoin poem from Matthew Haywood at Wintercooled on Twitter. Great work, Matthew. Jameson Lopp said, 10 years ago, the course of financial technology was shifted by an anonymous entity, that's a good tip away, that posted this 9-page white paper outlining a way to solve the double spending problem without intermediaries. So like the blockchain has a purpose? Double spending. Okay. It's been a wild ride ever since. And Whale Panda said, 10 years ago, Satoshi published the Bitcoin white paper. Now we're all Satoshi, except Craig Wright. Every single one of us is Satoshi Nakamoto, not you, everyone else. And VJ has the date and the time of the announcement. He says that Satoshi's creation is the most important innovation to money itself, the most important good in any society in 1,000 years. And as Satoshi said in the original email, oh, got small. Let's try one more time. I've been working on a new electronic cash system that's fully peer-to-peer with no trusted third party. And with that, we will almost be ready to begin our reading of Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. We're joined by Max Hillebrand, live from Russia. Say hello, Max.
Streets of St. Petersburg. Let's hope that the internet connection is not too bad. At least it should be better than in Germany, hopefully. But yes, it's been 10 years, and it's been a wild ride of 10 years. And I do think that the title says it all. Bitcoin is peer-to-peer. That means from Alice to Bob. It is electronic. That is a digital good, which used to be only non-scarce goods. And it's a cash system, which means it is a base money, the ultimate good that is not owed by anyone, but is owned by you. And it's a system, so it's a network. And therefore the network it grows in value as new peers and new nodes are added to the system. So Bitcoin is truly beautiful, and I thank Satoshi for his mic drop that he did exactly 10 years ago.
Absolutely. We also have a shout out to the trolls in the chat who are releasing the FUD. Just in case no one noticed, as Rhett says here on Twitter, about 10 hours ago, 5 hours ago, on Bitcoin's birthday, they have doubled down on the Bitcoin predicted to be the nail in the coffin of climate change. Once again, this is pure Vonnegut sci-fiism, where if the people have something to do with electricity, they'll naturally use all of the electricity in the world to do that thing. So we are unable to have any options or any new chips or any kind of other options. Bitcoin predicted to be the nail in the coffin of climate change.
Oh yes, this is it. We would have survived otherwise, but now with liberating money, no chance. Water will rise, floods will come.
And remember, with Bitcoin, you actually have to spend the money. You can't just print it. But we're going to go ahead and start out here with Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Satoshi Nakamoto, Satoshi N at gmx.com, www.bitcoin.org. Abstract. A purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. Digital signatures provide part of the solution, but the main benefits are lost if a trusted third party is still required to prevent double spending. We propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer network. The network timestamps transactions by hashing them into an ongoing chain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that cannot be changed without redoing the proof of work. The longest chain not only serves as proof of the sequence of events witnessed, but also proof that it came from the largest pool of CPU power. As long as a majority of CPU power is controlled by nodes that are not cooperating to attack the network, they'll generate the longest chain and outpace attackers. The network itself requires minimal structure. Messages are broadcast on a best effort basis, and nodes can leave and rejoin the network at will, accepting the longest proof of work chain as proof of what happened while they were gone. Introduction. Commerce.
Well, let me jump in right here because I might disagree with Satoshi here a bit. He says that the nodes that have exited the system can at any time jump back and then through the accumulated proof of work estimate themselves on which chain has actually been or is a valid one. But we all know that block time is so incredibly fast, and if you miss only a week of Bitcoin, then you've missed quite a lot. Missing of Bitcoin is really tedious, and I experienced that myself now, being in vacation for 1 week. There's so much going on every single second in this liberating money. Missing even one block of it is quite devastating. So although my full node might sync up, I still have to watch the 13 hours live stream from the Lightning Hack Day, among others. So lots of stuff going on in Bitcoin, and it's tough to keep up. But yes, proof of work is one way of doing so.
And it is more complex now. We have different types of nodes. We have nodes that don't get the entire blockchain. So if you did have a full node, you'd want to get the entire blockchain so you could get the proof of work. And if you fall behind, it is very difficult. Syncing the entire blockchain takes, at least a week now. It used to take a couple of days. Now it's more in the week territory. I'm told that the Ethereum blockchain is impossible to sync, even on the best computers. But let's continue with the introduction. Let's try to get going on what problems Satoshi was trying to solve. Introduction. Commerce on the internet has come to rely almost exclusively on financial institutions serving as trusted third parties to process electronic payments. While the system works well enough for most transactions, it still suffers from the inherent weaknesses of the trust-based model. Completely non-reversible transactions are not really possible, since financial institutions cannot avoid mediating disputes. The cost of mediation increases transaction costs, limiting the minimum practical transaction size and cutting off the possibility for small casual transactions. And there is a broader cost in the loss of the ability to make non-reversible payments for non-reversible services. With the possibility of reversal, the need for trust spreads. Merchants must be wary of their customers, hassling them for more information than they would otherwise need. A certain percentage of the fraud is accepted and as unavoidable. These costs and payment uncertainties can be avoided in person by using physical currency, but no mechanism exists to make payments over a communications channel without a trusted party. What is needed is an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust, allowing any two willing parties to transact directly with each other without the need for a trusted third party. Transactions that are computationally impractical to reverse would protect sellers from fraud, and routine escrow mechanisms could easily be implemented to protect buyers. In this paper, we propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer distributed timestamp server to generate computational proof of the chronological order of transactions. The system is secure as long as honest nodes collectively control more CPU power than any cooperating group of attacker nodes. So there in the introduction, Satoshi lays out the problem of commerce on the internet requiring financial transactions through a trusted third party. He talks about the necessity of an escrow service that could use this computationally impractical money that is difficult to reverse. We're also joined by NVK. How's it going? Say hello to the people. Oh, you're muted.
There you go. Hello.
Welcome to Satoshi's birthday.
Yeah.
Celebrating with Max and Tom. I'm in Malta. Max is in Russia.
Oh, wow. You guys are all over the place today.
Yep, and we're just celebrating Satoshi's birthday. We are starting off with the introduction. What do you think? Good start so far?
A good start. I mean, I see no better way to start this than to read the paper.
All right. We're going to continue there. We're going to see what Satoshi's got next in part 2, transactions. Oh, wait, Max, do you have a comment? Join us.
Well, you know, Satoshi laid out here, even in the first sentence, that historically you needed a trusted intermediary, a trusted financial institution to take care of the money. And that, of course, leads to a lot of issues, mainly with inflation of the money supply and with censoring of transactions, individual transactions. And all these earlier digital cash versions of money on the internet failed because there was this centralized party that was censoring or could be censored the individual transactions. And that is what Bitcoin makes it so novel. It is the decentralized peer-to-peer aspect without a trusted intermediary.
That it is, Max. And we're going to continue with section 2, transactions. We define an electronic coin as a chain of digital signatures. Each owner transfers the coin to the next by digitally signing a hash of the previous transaction and the public key of the next owner and adding these to the end of the coin. A payee can verify the signatures to verify the chain of ownership. And we have a chart here showing the owner's public key, creating a hash, and verifying the owner's signature. The owner 2 public key verifies their signature, and then the owner's private key signs along with the public signature, and the owner 2's private key signs his signature. As it says below, the problem, of course, is the payee can't verify that one of the owners did not double spend the coin. A common solution is to introduce a trusted central authority, or mint, that checks every transaction for double spending. After each transaction, the coin must be returned to the mint to issue a new coin, and only coins issued directly from the mint are trusted not to be double spent. The problem with this solution is that the fate of the entire money system depends upon the company running the mint, with every transaction having to go through them, just like a bank. We need a way for the payee to know that the previous owners did not sign any earlier transactions. For our purposes, the earliest transaction is the one that counts, so we don't care about later attempts to double spend. The only way to confirm the absence of a transaction is to be aware of all transactions. In the mint-based model, the mint was aware of all transactions and decided which arrived first. To accomplish this without a trusted party, transactions must be publicly announced, and we need a system for participants to agree on a single history of the order in which they were received. The payee needs proof. At the time of each transaction, the majority of nodes agreed that it was the first received. Let's see, can we go for Max for a comment? I know we're on a delay.
Well, and here again is the nuances of how Bitcoin actually works, is that these digital signatures itself are already a nice way of proving the control and ownership over such a digital money, but it's not yet a normal way of making sure that it has not yet been double spent. And here, this entire convoluted concept of a blockchain and proof of work and all this has to come in to fix all these difficult problems that a digital scarce money has to work out. But I'm curious what Rodolfo has to say about all this.
Well, I mean, the true beauty of this is that, you know, the scarcity comes from the waste, quote unquote, of electricity, right? You have to show that you worked to prove that you have that signature. So it was truly genius. Like, that's the true genius of it. It's this idea that you can create this scarcity on a chain of signatures. That is the most important part of the whole paper. That's what solves the problem.
The chain of signatures. Moving on to section 3, the timestamp server. The solution we propose begins with a timestamp server. A timestamp server works by taking a hash of a block of items to be timestamped and widely publishing the hash, such as in a newspaper or Usenet post. The timestamp provides that the data must have existed at the time, obviously, in order to get the hash. Each timestamp includes the previous timestamp in its hash, forming a chain, with each additional timestamp reinforcing the ones before it. That was quick. Okay, so
well, that was quick, but that is, you know, the Amber approach of the Bitcoin blockchain is that with every new block, with every new hash added, all the previous hashes are intermingled and put another layer on top with the most recent block. And here we get the idea of, with additional proof of work, with additional blocks being added to the chain, the more secure are the older and original transactions. So even the Genesis block from almost 10 years ago, every 10 minutes, a new block is found. This original block gets validated all over again. And this provides even more certainty that this original transaction is the true transaction with every 10 minutes, with every block interval. And that is quite a novel approach, that the longer you wait, the more you can be certain that it will not be double spent. This is quite an interesting approach, but there are, of course, trade-offs. It means that you have to wait quite a bit before you know that the transaction is final. And you know, this can be only one confirmation, this can be 6 confirmations, this might be 144 confirmations. That is ultimately up to you as the individual who can judge how secure this transaction has to be. But quite an interesting approach, this layering of the Amber to make this crystal, well, censorship resistant and irreversible.
Rodolfo, any comments on the timestamp server?
I mean, that's the beauty of Merkle 3, right? I mean, you're essentially creating a new proof based on a previous proof. And the previous proof is based on the previous proof. So once you have just enough, normally say in Bitcoin 4 to 6, it's just cryptographically very hard to reorg and recreate those blocks in a different chain. right? And that's why we do wait more than just one confirmation, ideally, to truly believe that transaction.
All right, moving on to section 4, proof of work. To implement a distributed timestamp server on a peer-to-peer basis, we will need to use a proof of work system similar to Adam Back's Hashcash, rather than newspaper or Usenet posts. The proof of work system involves scanning for a value that, when hashed, such as with SHA-256, the hash number begins with a number of 0 bits. The average work required is exponential in the number of 0 bits required and can be verified by executing a single hash. For our timestamp network, we implement the proof of work by incrementing a nonce in the block until a value is found, and that gives the block's hash the required 0 bits. Once the CPU effort has been expended to make it satisfy the proof of work, the block cannot be changed without redoing the work. As later blocks are chained after it, the work to change the block would include redoing all the blocks after it. The proof of work also solves the problem of determining representation in majority decision-making. If the majority were based on one IP address, one vote, it could be subverted by anyone able to allocate many IPs. Proof of work is essentially one CPU, one vote. The majority decision is represented by the longest chain, which has the greatest proof of work effort invested in it. If a majority of CPU power is controlled by honest nodes, the honest chain will grow to have the fastest and outpace any competing chains. To modify a passed block, an attacker would have to redo the proof of work of the block and all blocks after it, and then catch up with and surpass the work of the honest nodes. We will show later that the profitability of a slower attacker catching up diminishes exponentially as subsequent blocks are added. To compensate for increasing hardware speed and varying interest in running nodes over time, the proof of work difficulty is determined by a moving average, targeting an average number of blocks per hour. If they're generated too fast, the difficulty increases.
So this is the one that I wish Satoshi made a little bit more clear there. After one CPU, one vote, he should have added a note about validating nodes, right? So relay nodes, because relay nodes are what sort of essentially enforces the consensus. And these relay nodes are often sort of, theoretically you could Sybil them, but what is really important is the economic, economically meaningful relaying nodes, right? So people who actually have stake in Bitcoin relaying transactions, those people count because they would be a large chunk of the transactions in the network, or a large chunk of transactions that could be transacted in the network. So that's such a shame that wasn't added in there, and that's why we have our BTC, is because they took that a little too literal.
That's right.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I mean, what Satoshi is saying here, one CPU, one vote, is not necessarily based on the chip itself, but rather on the hashing power. And so for every hash that you as a miner is creating, is hashing, that is equal to any other miner who is creating this hash. And then absolutely, I find this distinction between fully verifying and validating nodes, like the node that we all should be running on our Raspberry Pi, and the node that is being run by miners and used to do the mining and proof of work. Those are two completely separate entities. The fully verifying full node should be everyone on the network, right? That is you who is setting his own monetary regulations and rules, right? And you that is enforcing them. A miner is a entity that you as a full node are hiring to secure the network. So if you as the full node user want to have additional security in your network, you make incentives in your network such that these miners are gonna well, put their hashing power to this network. But absolutely, as Rodolfo said, there is a big distinction between these two nodes, and it's a shame that it's not laid out more clearly, the differences of different nodes and what their role in this ecosystem is, and the clear distinction that miners are the employees of full nodes, of the actual users of the system.
Yeah, it's what keeps miners honest, right? Because even so say you have a good chunk of the hashing power that is dishonest, that's colluding, right? Essentially, the validating nodes prevent the rest of the network from being co-opted, and that's essentially what happened with USF. Miners were holding everything back, and yet the network was able to show that it's not just the proof of work that matters, right? What matters is the economic nodes matter just as equally, or it's just hard to say which matters more, because it's all sort of like a soup of game theory. But everything matters here, and not just the hashing power.
All right, let's continue on to section 5, network. The steps to run the network are as follows. Number 1, new transactions are broadcast to all nodes. Number 2, each node collects new transactions into a block. Number 3, each node works on finding a difficult proof of work for its block. Number 4, when a node finds a proof of work, it broadcasts the block to all nodes. Number 5, nodes accept the block only if all transactions in it are valid and not already spent. Number 6, nodes express their acceptance of the block by working on creating the next block in the chain, using the hash of the accepted block as the previous hash. Nodes always consider the longest chain to be the correct one and will keep working on extending it. If two nodes broadcast different versions of the next block simultaneously, some nodes may receive one or the other first. In that case, they work on the first one they received, but save the other branch in case it becomes longer. The tie will be broken when the next proof of work is found, and one branch becomes longer. The nodes that were working on the other branch will then switch to the longer one. New transaction broadcasts do not necessarily need to reach all nodes. As long as they reach many nodes, they will get into a block before long. Block broadcasts are also tolerant of dropped messages. If a node does not receive a block, it will request it when it receives the next block and realizes it missed one. Max, what do you think?
Well, it's quite interesting, right? That this peer-to-peer network, it's not really necessary to address these information packages to one specific node, but you gossip them out to everyone, and you yell the information out of on top of the mountain, and that's it. It doesn't matter if everyone reaches this or is reached by this message, or if only a few nodes acquire this information. But because there are cryptographical proofs and game theoretical concepts encoded in this information, we can entrust that even if a couple nodes reach this information and continue playing by consensus rules, which they are incentivized to do so, that the network continues to function. And that is quite interesting, that regardless of who is listening, the system works.
All right, Rodolfo, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beautiful topology of Bitcoin, right? It's not decentralized, it's actually distributed. Although we all sort of just use the word decentralized, it's actually distributed. Everybody has a copy of the distribution of the information. Everybody has a copy of everything, and that's what makes it work. And that's what makes it to self-validate as the same way as any other node in the network can self-validate as well. That's pretty neat.
All right, we're also joined by Roman. How's it going, Roman?
Hey guys, Roman, CTO of Hodl. Max just sent me the link, so I'm going to be here for maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
Very good. Just anything you want to say about the white paper? We're celebrating the 10th anniversary today.
Yeah. I've read it, so I guess I'll just listen to the discussion and chime in
All right.
all right?
Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard, Roman. We're going to move on to section 6 right now, and we're just going to keep on trucking. Let's see here. Section 6, incentive. By convention, the first transaction in a block is a special transaction that starts a new coin owned by the creator of the block. This adds an incentive for nodes to support the network and provides a way to initially distribute coins into circulation, since there is no central authority to issue them. The steady addition of a constant amount of new coins is analogous to gold miners expending resources to add gold to circulation. In our case, it is CPU time and electricity that is expended. The incentive can also be funded with transaction fees. If the output value of a transaction is less than its input value, the difference is a transaction fee that is added to the incentive value of the block containing the transaction. Once a predetermined number of coins have entered circulation, the incentive can transition entirely to transaction fees and be completely inflation-free. The incentive may help encourage nodes to stay honest. If a greedy attacker is able to assemble more CPU power than all the honest nodes, he would have to choose between using it to defraud people by stealing back his payments or using it to generate new coins. He ought to find it more profitable to play by the rules, such rules that favor him with more new coins than everyone else combined, rather than to undermine the system and the validity of its own wealth. Max, what do you think about the incentive? Go ahead.
That is quite an interesting problem, right? Because Satoshi had a dilemma here. He needed to have miners provide valid proof of work, so to secure the network, but nobody was using the network yet, so nobody was willing to pay for it. Thus, he needed to add another type of incentive, and he chose to add a monetary inflation. So he was creating money out of nothing, right? Bitcoin out of no input to the output, the address of the miner in the Coinbase transaction. And this gave enough incentive to validate the chain and to make sure that enough proof of work was added. However, this is inflation, right? And that creates a lot of malinvestments and overconsumption. So he realized that he had to cut down on this inflation so to prevent the monetary stability of the network. And this is then where he said here in this chapter that eventually the transaction fees, the direct payment for security, has to be sufficient. And this subsidy of inflation money has to be minimized and eventually cut off after a couple 100,000 blocks. So quite novel how he added the economically bad inflation model, which is necessary though to provide the security. And he added a cryptographic proof that this inflation schedule will eventually go to zero. So as with a lot here in the white paper, it's quite novel and super interesting how he solved this tricky problem.
I agree, Max. Satoshi is definitely making a choice here. He's making a trade-off, and maybe he's making the last time in human history that we should really print money. And he's done it wisely with knowledge of the consequences. The deflationary structure of the block reward reducing is implied in this section, as well as the idea that the incentive could eventually be funded with only transaction fees, meaning that transaction fees could rise in order to encourage the use of the blockchain and the Bitcoin, as well as these classic words towards the end that it should encourage nodes to stay honest and that it ought to be more profitable to play by the rules. It ought to be more profitable to play by the rules. You don't need to print your own money. You can print Bitcoin and be a miner and be part of the system. Roman, what do you think about the incentive as laid out by Satoshi? You got to unmute yourself. But then it's going to work.
Yeah, forgot to make. So I think I connected to the Hangout just in time because I love talking about incentives. I think people should think about incentives when they develop any kind of software, honestly. So reading this paragraph, you first notice it's rather short. Right? And the reason it's short is because Satoshi could not envision all sorts of incentives that would exist 10 years later after the white paper was published, right? So that's one problem. I think his notion that eventually transaction fees should constitute a good enough incentive for miners and nodes to stay honest. I think, I mean, I wouldn't say like it's questionable. It's just that there are all sorts of other incentives. For example, there's an incentive for miners to consolidate and to control more hash power. And in that case, they can also dictate what would be the transaction fee by censoring transactions. There are all sorts of things. And then if we go back to, well, not go back, if we talk about Lightning Network, I think it's also very, very important to think about incentives when people develop the Lightning Network. And to me, that remains the biggest question out there. We obviously have seen an explosion of this technology in the recent in the past year. Lots of people working on it, but the question remains: what is the incentive for people to run Lightning nodes apart from being just enthusiasts? That's the problem right now. So I'm sure there's a way to sort of solve this problem, solve this issue. I just would like to encourage everyone who works on Bitcoin, who works on Lightning, to always think about incentives. That's one of the cornerstones of Bitcoin. It's very, very important.
All right, let's go to Rodolfo on incentives.
Yeah, I think 10 years ago, I didn't used to think about incentives so much in my life in terms of as a very concrete thing, or in terms of what is it that I do for a living with software, or, I think that's one of sort of like the biggest lessons that Satoshi gave, is sort of like to truly pay attention at the game theory in your life, in your everyday life. It is sort of like a very weird realization, because I don't think that is the reality for most people that are not in this space. And it was quite brilliant. I mean, to create the incentive in a way that is just perfect game theory, right? Like if you screw, you have to choose how you screw the other players in the network, and that's sort of like that can sort of screw you. That was truly brilliant. Now, I'm not as concerned about, say, Lightning or anything like that. It's a, I think that, Bitcoin was designed like any software is, with a ton of limitations and flaws. That's just how software is designed. I think that how Satoshi sort of came up with the concept is perfect, right? So I think that once we sort of improved the capacity of the network, we did it in a way and at a time where it's sort of like it fixed the incentive problems that Bitcoin had, because we got to a peak there. Although we know that one of the culprits was Coinbase not batching transactions, we got to a point where there was no incentive to use Bitcoin aside from hodling, because it was just more expensive to spend Bitcoin than it was for the amount that you were spending. And aside from dragging feet of miners who wanted to increase, probably transaction fees because of their incentives, they had to accept that the users, the economic nodes of the network, wouldn't put up with it. So they changed the incentive. They tweaked the incentive so that Bitcoin would be something that every single entity in the network wants to, that can put up with that incentive model, right? So SegWit added that extra capacity and made sure that the incentives were aligned with the economic majority, which is sort of the most important part, because without economic majority, there is no Bitcoin. There is nothing. There is no incentive to mine. There is no incentive to do anything. I find that is truly fascinating. And then what's interesting about Lightning is that Lightning still leverages the Bitcoin incentives. It still uses Bitcoin. It's still a UTXO in a block. It's a valid coin, right? That is just sort of assigned to a new receiver within a last rock solid, but still solid enough for the amount of money that you're transacting. I think, you know, Lightning, the fact that Lightning is essentially almost sub Satoshi for you, actually it is sub Satoshi for you to send a transaction, changes the dynamic, and sort of shows to miners something that maybe they don't want to understand. That sort of, like, to me was very clear since the beginning of Bitcoin, is that mining is a great way to acquire cheap coins, but it was never a great way for you to sort of, you know, become a free money, sort of like a great money maker, right? Because mining is a commodity, right? It's always going to be driven down by people who have the most amount of resources. You know, it's the Walmart part of Bitcoin. They're just going to play on economies of scale. And
can I just comment on something you said?
Yeah.
Because you were talking about how Lightning security is enough to for the amount of money being transacted, and I think that was not my argument. My argument about incentives was how do we get enough incentives for Lightning developers to keep developing the network and the software? That was the point.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean, I wasn't correcting you. I was just sort of like running with it. So yeah, I forgot where I was. Anyways, point is,
you said we were becoming the Walmart of crypto because we could outpace the other miners. Yeah,
mining is sort of like the economies of scale, you know, part of the network, right? And the expectation that would become, you know, more and more sort of like lucrative. It's a little bit the dependence on that is kind of stupid, since you're always going to be driven down. If you are an entity that has access to economies of scale for the hardware, right, for electricity, then this is a good business for you. You know, I mean, part of me sort of says that, you know, maybe in another 10 years, mining is going to be so unlucrative, right, because the block rewards will be so small that that who knows, maybe we're back to mining ourselves again. That is not impossible. Anyways, it's
also worth noting that the mining and the voting never was intended to determine whether or not we should upgrade the software. It seems obvious that a group of miners would collaborate to control such a vote to make the software favor them and to hurt the new incoming miners. Whereas it's obvious that the voting was more of a signaling, like a timing, like we've installed the upgrade, it went fine. We've installed the upgrade, it went fine, rather than accountable vote.
It was a flag, never a vote. Bitcoin is not a democracy, right? I mean, those flags were great. It's a great way of coordination, but it's not a vote. It has no meaning in that sense. And I think that's what probably one of the reasons why Satoshi put BIP9 anyways, which is USF. It's a way for the network to upgrade, because we need to upgrade.
That's right. It was never intended to be a vote. Bitcoin's not a democracy. Let's continue on with section 7, reclaiming disk space. Once the latest transaction in a coin is buried under enough blocks, the spent transactions before it can be discarded to save disk space. To facilitate this without breaking the block's hash, transactions are hashed in a Merkle tree, with only the root included in the block's hash. Old blocks can then be compacted by stubbing off branches of the tree. The interior hashes do not need to be stored. And there's a figure showing transactions hashed in a Merkle tree, and there's a second figure after pruning transaction 0-2 from the block. A block header with no transaction would be about 80 bytes. If we suppose blocks are generated every 10 minutes, 80 bytes times 6 times 24 times 365 equals 4.2 megabytes per year. With computer systems typically selling with 2 gigabytes of RAM as of 2008, and Moore's law predicting current growth of 1.2 gigabytes per year, storage should not be a problem, even if the block headers must be kept in memory. And that's it. That's a very short section about reclaiming disk space. What do you guys think?
Well, it's quite interesting here, right? Bitcoin here is, in that sense, better than Monero, that you can at least discard from the memory pool these transaction outputs that have already spent, and only keep the unspent transaction outputs. However, the blockchain, the thing that you have to download and initially sync on your first run of the Bitcoin full node, you still have to verify and validate every single one of these. Right, so as the initial user of the Bitcoin network, you still have to go through every single transaction and verify that these were not double spent and that these are rightful transactions. So that is something that Bitcoin, compared to something like Mimblewimble, is lacking a bit, in the sense that it does not optimally give you or free up enough resources, for example, a fast sync. But once you are synced up, you can discard anything other than the memory pool of unspent transaction outputs.
All right, Rodolfo, a comment on this?
Yeah, I'll be quick. It's just another clever thing that you get for free, essentially, with Merkle trees, right? Like, you can have a hash of like a block of information, not just Bitcoin, and sort of use that as your source of truth. But you should always sync the whole shebang, get the whole thing, and then generate those yourself so that you know that the sources of truth, the summary sources of truth, are true.
And certainly the second paragraph is not the strongest. Whenever you have to put hard numbers into a paper like this, they always turn out wrong. Like Bill Gates, who famously said 4 kilobytes is all that we'll ever need. Things like this. Obviously, Moore's law seems broken right now. Processors are not growing as fast as they used to. We're still doing good on storage. No problems on storage. We could also probably get enough RAM, maybe, to store the blockchain. I'm not sure. 64, no. 128? No? Okay.
Well, so
RAM is out.
Way back, when Bitcoin was about, I think, 8 or 16 gigabytes, we created a project called the block, what is it? btclook.com. So we had the whole blockchain in RAM. It was fun as hell. Because, yeah, so we used Redis, and we had, the whole blockchain in RAM in a normal PC. It was fantastic. We could do so much cool visualizations with it locally. Now, I think, what's the current block size now? Is it, I can't remember. It's 600 gigabytes?
All right, 600 gigabytes. That would be a lot of RAM.
Yeah, so it is possible to get systems, I think, with around 240 or 300 gigabytes that are sort of, in one system. That might beat some servers out there that will cost, like the equivalent of a very fast car, that you can probably put more than that, and there would be more specialized equipment. But in a single computer, realistically, we're way past RAM for blockchain. Thankfully, with solid storage for hard drives, it's much faster retrieval of information, so it's not as bad as spinning disks. But still, I think we're way past the RAM for storage of blocks at this point.
And also, flash memory would be out. That's not quite up to 600 gigabytes yet, I don't think.
Oh, 640 for
640,
micro SSD now, I think. Yeah.
Well, we're getting closer. We need to work on that. But yeah, once again, whenever you put hard numbers in anything, it always looks bad later. But we get the idea that he was trying to put forth there. Let's move on to Section 8, Simplified Payment Verification. It is possible to verify payments without running a full network node. A user only needs to keep a copy of the block headers of the longest proof of work chain, which he can get by querying network nodes until he's convinced he has the longest chain, and obtain the Merkle branch, linking the transaction to the block it's timestamped in. He can't check the transaction for himself, but by linking it to a place in the chain, he can see that a network node has accepted it, and blocks added after it further confirm the network has accepted it. And we have a diagram here of the longest proof of work chain, showing the block header with the previous hash, the nonce, the Merkle root, the block header with the Merkle root being linked to by the hash and hash 23, or maybe 2 and 3. Previous hash, the nonce, and the Merkle root in the next block. A good diagram. As such, the verification is reliable as long as honest nodes control the network, but is more vulnerable if the network is overpowered by an attacker. While network nodes can verify transactions for themselves, the simplified method can be fooled by an attacker's fabricated transactions as long as the attacker can continue to overpower the network. One strategy to protect against this would be to accept alerts from network nodes when they detect an invalid block, prompting the user's software to download the full block and alerted transactions to confirm the inconsistency. Businesses that receive frequent payments will probably still want to run their own nodes for more independent security and quicker verification. Max, what do you think about simplified payment verification?
Well, Satoshi is right in the sense that you have to trust miners, that half of the miners at least are honest, so that the proofs are correct. But I don't think that this is the main drawback for SPV wallets. It's more a privacy concern. You have to put out your specific addresses that you're interested in and query if anything interesting is happening with these. And this means so that the SPV provider can or knows that you're at least interested in these transactions, and most likely that they belong to you. And therefore, it puts you at risk of leaking private information, like the amount of money that you control, or what you're doing, and the spending patterns of your money. So SPVs are not perfect for, you still have to trust miners a bit, and especially that you have to give up vitally private information, like the amount of money that you control and what exactly you do with it.
And Satoshi seems to agree with you too. He says that you should always run a full node. Towards the end of this section, he says if you are a merchant, it may verify you. Businesses that receive frequent payments will probably still want to run their own nodes for more independent security and quicker verification. Rodolfo, what do you think about simplified payment verification?
Well, SPV has been around for a while. Electrum is a very famous SPV wallet. There is a lot of work being done on making privacy better with SPV. I'm not going to touch on that. Not my specialty. But I think what's very interesting about SPV is that there is a very simple solution for you to run an SPV wallet that's substantially faster to run. It's a great experience. And yet don't have to worry too much about the privacy. And that is by very simply just running your own full node. And you can run, for example, an Electrum server and point your Electrum to it. So essentially, you get the SPV fast functionality on the wallet without running that on your your main system where you're trying to do your day-to-day. And that could be pointed to some server you control. And that solves a lot of the SPV problem with that. We actually do that on our shopping cart. We have what we call Connectrum, a little program that we wrote to connect our web server that does payments as a merchant. And then we validate those against a Electrum server that we control to a node that we control, right? So we solve that issue, don't have to run a full node on the actual web server, and get the benefits of all the software that's being written by an SPV wallet like Electrum, and sort of respect this idea that even Satoshi mentioned there, that if you're a merchant, you should be running your own node so that it don't get cheated.
I think it's also a strong section because it shows the complexity of this paper. Like Max was saying earlier, Satoshi's making trade-offs. He's making it clear that you can confirm your payment if you are willing to make your address public. We all know that there is as many Bitcoin addresses as stars in the sky multiplied times grains of sand on the beach. So there are a lot of addresses out there. So like Max was saying, if you don't expose your address to an SPV client or to someone who will then look it up for you, they can't tell that anything's on your address. And if you're running a full node where you download the entire copy of the blockchain for yourself, you could confirm by searching your own data. It's a little bit like what Google did initially with the internet. Without anyone's permission, Google went out there and downloaded the entire internet. They then began to search their local version of the internet for links that matched up, sites that were linked to very often. Things like this are the basis of the PageRank algorithm. In the same way, if you download the entire copy of the blockchain, you'll be able to search your own local version of the blockchain, just remaining completely private, whereas this provides for an alternative if you don't want to do that. All right, we're going to move on to section 9, combining and splitting value. Although it would be possible to handle coins individually, it would be unwieldy to make a separate transaction for every cent in a transfer. To allow value to be split and combined, transactions contain multiple inputs and outputs. Normally, there will be either a single input from a larger previous transaction or multiple inputs combining the smaller amounts, and at most 2 outputs, one for the payment and one for the returning the change, if any, back to the seller. As a diagram of a transaction going in and transactions going out, it should be noted that fan out, where a transaction depends on several transactions and those transactions depend on many more, is not a problem here. There is never the need to extract a complete standalone copy of a transaction's history. All right, Max, combining and splitting value. What do you think?
Well, that is inherently with the UTXO model, right? Is that you have to always spend the entire UTXO. You cannot spend half of the unspent transaction output, because once you have spent it, well, it's spent. It cannot be half spent. And so you have to accumulate a lot of different UTXOs until you have accumulated the value that you want to transact. And the excessive values, that is the output, the amount that you want to send, and the input, that is the amount of UTXOs that you control, that goes back into another UTXO, which is the change address. So basically, you always have to put everything you have in the transaction, and what's left over, you get back in a new UTXO. Which is well, it's a trade-off. It makes it easier to handle all your UTXOs, but of course it creates a new UTXO for every transaction in the change output.
And this also exposes how much money you have in your account, since they know because they're sending it back to you in change. That's why we always tell people to reuse addresses, so they can't tell how much funds you have. And maybe another way of saying this, Max, is that you're essentially exposing your private keys to the person that you're sending it to. So the person you're sending it to will have your private keys. So if you left your money in that account, your change, that person could help themselves to the change, just like with the credit card system, when people can help themselves to your account after they find your card. Satoshi didn't want it to be that way, so the entire amount is sent, then the change is sent back to a new private key that cannot be taken by the person that the original money was sent to. NVK or Rodolfo, response on this? We're also joined by Josh from Voltoro. How's it going, Josh? Any comments on combining and splitting value, Satoshi's clever way of sending the entire amount and sending you back the change?
Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? I've always loved that. It was a nice way of obfuscating, or making it more private just through obfuscation. But really, Bitcoin needs to go a little bit further down the track, I feel. And this is what the Lightning Network's allowing it to do, is allowing it to be more anonymous. But what I found fascinating with the whole splitting thing is how Satoshi Dias managed to get Bitcoin back to understand how it got. I never understood it really. Does anyone here understood how that worked? How when you sent money into Satoshi Dias back in the day, it would send back to your wallet your winnings without knowing your wallet. Like it somehow figured out.
Somehow it's a new wallet that's related to your old wallet. Because I know that's how the change goes back. The change seems to stay in the same address, but then it's some kind of a sub address, or it's signed with a new key or a new hash. something like that. But yeah, I didn't use Satoshi Dice, so I don't know how it works, Josh.
No, yes.
No.
Absolutely.
Gambling in this establishment, never. But
never. It's not a killer app.
No. And he just sold at just the right time. But that was Satoshi's section on combining and splitting value. Let's move on to section 10, privacy. The traditional banking model achieves a level of privacy by limiting access to information to the parties involved and the trusted third party. The necessity to announce all transactions publicly precludes this method, but privacy can still be maintained by breaking the flow of information in another place, by keeping the public keys anonymous. The public can see that someone is sending an amount to someone else, but without information linking the transaction to anyone. This is similar to the level of information released by stock exchanges, where the time and size of individual trades, the tape, is made public, but without telling who the parties were. And he has a model here, a graph. He says the traditional privacy model has identities, transactions, a trusted third party, a counterparty, and some of the information is made public. In the new privacy model, there are identities, then there's a wall, and then there's the transactions, which are made entirely public. As an additional firewall, a new key pair should be used for each transaction to keep them from being linked to a common owner. Some linking is still unavoidable with multi-input transactions, which necessarily reveal that their inputs were owned by the same owner. The risk is that if the owner of a key is revealed, linking could reveal other transactions that belonged to the same owner. So obviously this is where a lot of the things we were talking about come up again. A new key pair should be used for each transaction. So for example, my donation address, you can look at my donations and you can see all of the people that donated to me. And if they didn't use a new key, you can see some of their other transactions. This is a necessary evil, again, with Satoshi making trade-offs, comparing the system to the stock exchange where individual trades and the tape is made public, but not the information on who the parties are. So let's go down the line. See, Max, are you with us?
Well, the interesting thing here is that in the incumbent fiat system, it is a debt-based monetary system. So each monetary unit is a debt that you owe to someone else. And therefore, we need to know who is who in this financial system, right? We need to know who owns or who owes whom what. And therefore, we need all this know your customer, all these anti-money laundering, and all these other regulations that break your privacy and de-anonymize you. We need that in this fiat system because otherwise we would not know who owes who. Bitcoin is inherently 100% different. It is not a debt-based system, it is an asset-based system. You don't owe anyone Bitcoin, you own Bitcoin. And that means that it doesn't matter who owns what, because it is a bearer asset, it is a bearer instrument. Therefore, further, we do not need any know your customer. We do not need to know with whom we are transacting. Alice does not need to know who Bob is. Alice can verify that Bob has relinquished control over his bearer asset and that he has handed this control over to Alice. Therefore, the know your customer and the anti-money laundering is in Bitcoin completely useless. Quite contrarily, it actually breaks your privacy and anonymity, thus it puts you, the user, on enormous risk of being stolen from or being attacked. So all this push to know your customer on the exchange side is because we have the interaction with a fiat-based system, but as soon as we have 100% moved into Bitcoin, there should not be any know your customer whatsoever. Rather, there should be 100% anonymity everywhere. And that's why stuff like the Wasabi wallet is so amazing.
And this is also the section that introduces the idea of pseudo-anonymity. As long as you keep your public key private, everyone only knows that that's an address. Whereas Satoshi himself says right here, a new key pair should be used for each transaction to keep them from being linked. Too many times the transactions get linked and pseudo-anonymity soon becomes nothing but a word. Rodolfo, your thoughts on this section of the white paper?
Yeah, so that was sort of like the that was the compromise Satoshi made. But what was really cool was as soon as BIP32 came out, so hierarchical deterministic keys, that really helped, because you could still try to follow the chain back to see who owns what based on sort of IPs that broadcasted and all that stuff, which is what chain analysis does. But at least with BIP32, you didn't have to create a private key public key pair anymore per transaction, which was needed before, or receive all the funds on the same address, which was also done before. Now, with BIP32, you could simply just deterministically create new addresses that were corresponding to the same private key, which is it's really fantastic way of doing these things. Now, with mixing services and tumbling, so Chaumian, I think, does Wasabi use Chaumian mixing or something like that?
Yes, exactly. Chaumian coin joins used in Wasabi.
So with join markets, right, the original join markets, once you start tumbling, and so you're mixing inputs from other people with your inputs, and you start sort of adding a bunch of inputs that are sort of corresponding or fake inputs, that makes it very hard for a coin analysis software to figure out which cluster is what, right? Because you start mixing with everybody's parts, kind of like a dancing chair. You keep on playing around, and then wait, where did that go? Who owns what? So privacy on Bitcoin is not perfect, but it's surprisingly private if you make sure that you're using your own node to verify your transactions and to broadcast your transactions, because then you're not allowing a third party, right, to sort of like rat on who you are as a person related to that address that they did broadcast for you. So that's a big one. Private nodes do make a big difference on that. And I think it's just important to mention that, because there is this sort of trend of people saying that privacy on Bitcoin is terrible, Bitcoin is not private. Well, Bitcoin is if you do it right. It's not perfectly private, but it does a great job if you just sort of like make sure that you sanitize how you check transactions and how you broadcast them.
All right, let's go to Josh from Voltorno, joining us all the way from Lightning Hack Day in New York City. How's it going, Josh?
Good. Yeah, Lightning Hack Day, hacking the Lightning Network. What a fantastic event. Yeah, I have to tell you guys about it later. But in terms of this chapter, I want to go back to what Max was saying with the KYC and the how anonymous Bitcoin is, or how private it is and how private it isn't. The one thing that Bitcoin, these bearer-based instruments, open up is the cheapest attack vector in the world, and that's the wrench attack. And meaning someone just comes and robs you, holds a massive wrench or a gun to your head, right? So it's extremely important now that we move into this era of asset-based money, bearer-based instruments, of holding rare numbers, is that the fact that you need privacy in that, because kidnappings and all these sorts of things will become more and more prevalent if we don't have, if we don't have privacy built in, so that people really don't know how much other people have, because it is a violent world out there. It is a scary world, and there's a lot of scary people. So it's important now that we are becoming our own banks, is to take, banks don't go around flirting how much they've got because of certain reasons, and they spend years on security, but they do have the some of the bad things that we think of about banks, like the fact that they can reverse transactions, is also a good thing when it comes to wrench attacks. So I would say, yeah, Bitcoin needs to go further down the privacy train, and this is what, like I said before, the Lightning Network really does enable a lot more privacy as a second layer solution.
All right, and moving on to section 11, calculations. We consider the scenario of an attacker trying to generate an alternative chain faster than the honest chain. Even if this is accomplished, it does not throw the system open to arbitrary changes, such as creating value out of thin air or taking money that never belonged to the attacker. Nodes are not going to accept an invalid transaction as payment, and honest nodes will never accept a block containing them. An attacker can only try to change one of his own transactions to take back money he recently spent. The race between the honest chain and an attacker chain can be characterized as a binomial random walk. The success event is the honest chain being extended by one block, increasing its lead by +1. And the failure event is the attacker's chain being extended by one block, reducing the gap by -1. The probability of an attacker catching up from a given deficit is analogous to a gambler's ruin problem. Suppose a gambler with unlimited credit starts at a deficit and plays potentially an infinite number of trials to try to reach break even. We can calculate the probability he ever reaches break even, or that an attacker even catches up with the honest chain, as follows. And he has a chart here. P is the probability that an honest node finds the next block. Q is the probability that the attacker finds the next block. And Q to the Z is the probability the attacker will ever catch up from Z blocks behind. In the formula, Q to the Z is defined as 1 over the product of Q divided by P to the Z power, if P is less than or equal to Q, or if P is greater than Q. Given our assumption that P is greater than Q, probability drops exponentially as the number of blocks the attacker has to catch up with increases. With the odds against him, if he doesn't make a lucky lunge forward early on, his chances become vanishingly small as he falls further behind. We now consider how long the recipient of a new transaction needs to wait before being sufficiently certain the sender can't change the transaction. We assume the sender is an attacker who wants to make the recipient believe he paid him for a while, then switch it back to pay back to himself after some time has passed. The receiver will be alerted when that happens, but the sender hopes it will be too late. The receiver generates a new key pair and gives the public key to the sender shortly before signing. This prevents the sender from preparing a chain of blocks ahead of time by working on it continuously until he is lucky enough to get that far ahead, then executing the transaction at that moment. Once the transaction has been sent, the dishonest sender starts working in secret on a parallel chain containing an alternative version of his transaction. The recipient waits until the transaction has been added to a block and Z blocks have been linked after it. He doesn't know the exact amount of progress the attacker has made, but assuming the honest blocks took the average expected time per block, and the attacker's potential progress will be a Poisson distribution with the expected value of delta equals Z of Q over P. To get each probability that the attacker could still catch up now, we multiply the Poisson density for each amount of progress he could have made by the probability he could catch up from that point. It's an additional math feature. Rearranging to avoid summing the infinite tail of the distribution, and he's also converted it to C code, including math.h, and he has a function here of double spend attacker success probability with the inputs of double Q and integer Z. He takes the transaction and he returns the sum. Running some results, we can see the probability drop off exponentially with Z. It's becoming harder and harder to attack the network. He also shows solving P for less than 0.1. So let's go to Max. We have our first math of the paper, and we even have some C code. What's going on here in calculations?
Well, although this seems really, really tricky, right? And this is pretty much the only, let's say, more complex subject that is being talked about here in this paper, it's actually not too difficult if you think about it. Basically, what he is saying here is that it depends on who controls what hashing power in relation to the attacker. So if the honest people are in the majority, then this means that it is much more likely that the next block will be found by the honest people rather than the malicious attacker. And therefore, if you wait for, let's say, one block confirmation, and let's say that the honest miners have 60% of the hashing power, then you can be certain that for 60% of the following block, it is going to be created by the honest nodes. And this will give then accumulation a exponential increase in the certainty that you get that this block or this chain eventually was mined by true and honest actors and not malicious ones. And basically Satoshi is just saying here that if you want to be certain that there is no reorganization attack due to malicious miners, you have to wait for accumulated proof of work. This is additional confirmations in the Bitcoin network. And of course, the more you wait, the more secure you are that there is no reorganization. Interesting, though, is how Lightning Network builds upon this reorg attack and makes it in such a way that actually accepting zero confirmation transactions is viable and is no longer as risky as it would be without the smart contract of the Lightning Network. So quite interesting, but all the FUD saying that you can accept zero confirmation on-chain transactions is nonsense. It's clearly here, even in the white paper, that a zero confirmation transaction is not yet a valid transaction because it does not have accumulated proof of work that protects you against malicious miners.
Let's go to Josh. Your thoughts on the calculation section where Satoshi pretty much spells out a 51% attack and why it probably wouldn't work.
Yeah, I mean, just having you read through that again really shows the eloquence of Satoshi's writings while allowing the layman to really understand it, and then letting someone that's a bit more versed in calculus and math to really understand on a more technical level. So it's just a really nice chapter. In terms of the 51% attack, this has been the sort of Achilles heel in terms of the media of attacking Bitcoin. This is the big attack that keeps getting pulled out whenever someone talks about how uncertain it is and why banks shouldn't trust it and this and that. But really, I mean, a 51% attack, all the attacker can really do, even if they put the billions in or the million, it would be a lot of money by now. You really, all they can do is reverse a transaction. So it's not like they can do that much damage. And really, it's just worthwhile. And this is where the game theory comes in. It's just to hash for the network and make money like that if you're going to spend so much money. It's just such a beautiful game theoretical system. I'm always in awe.
It's especially great to see him address these problems right here in the white paper. When he was making the announcement, everyone would say well, I would double spend it, or I would attack it with a longer chain. And he addresses those right here, like Max says, in a order of increasing complexity. First, he shows you the description, then he shows you the math, and then he even shows you a formula for a C code that will do it in a very basic way. Max, did you have more on this subject?
Oh yeah, and there was an email, I think on November 4th, so that's what, 4 or 5 days after, where he talks in depth more about this, and that actually a 51% attack would only mean that you have that the attacker can respend a transaction. He can kind of bounce a check. He cannot steal any money. He could just steal goods and services from a merchant that has accepted a zero confirmation transaction, and not more.
So once again, all of the basic ideas are here. You should not reuse addresses. You should not accept zero confirmation transactions, all laid out for you in the white paper. I think we're getting close to the end. This section is called Conclusion, number 12. We have proposed a system for electronic transactions without relying on trust. We started with the usual framework of coins made from digital signatures, which provides strong control of ownership. but is incomplete without a way to prevent double spending. To solve this, we proposed a peer-to-peer network using proof of work to record a public history of transactions that quickly becomes computationally impractical for an attacker to change if honest nodes control a majority of CPU power. The network is robust in its unstructured simplicity. Nodes work at once, all at once, with little coordination. They do not need to be identified since messages are not routed to any particular place and only need to be delivered on a best effort basis. Nodes can leave and rejoin the network at will, accepting the proof of work chain as proof of what happened while they were gone. They vote with their CPU power, expressing their acceptance of valid blocks by working on extending them and rejecting invalid blocks by refusing to work on them. Any needed rules and incentives can be enforced with this consensus mechanism. And the final page is simply references to Wei Dai and B Money, Messias, Avala, and Quicksolder, design of a secure timestamping service with minimal trust requirements. Haber and Stornetta, how to timestamp a digital document from In Journal of Cryptography. D. Bayer, S. Haber, and W.S. Stornetta, improving the efficiency and reliability of digital timestamping. Again, Haber and Stornetta, secure names for bit strings. Adam Back, Hashcash, a denial of service countermeasure. R.C. Merkel, protocols for public key crypto systems. And finally, W. Feller, an introduction to probability theory and its applications. Josh, what do you think about Satoshi's conclusion here of the white paper?
Oh man, it just brings back so many memories. It's after reading, the last word in that, I remember just sort of sitting there blinking, thinking, "Oh my God, they've cracked it, or she's cracked it," and I went straight back to the back to the front so I could truly understand it again, and it just solved so many problems, and seeing these problems that were being solved then opened up my imagination so much into what's possible now. What's possible if this actually works, and it is working. By the time I found it was, going for 2 years or something, and it's working. It hasn't been I mean, there was a couple of bugs right at the beginning, but it's just so beautiful. And seeing some of the references there from the work of Adam Back and Ralph Merkel, and everything, all these pieces of the puzzle that came together to make this. It really was in a way that Satoshi actually put together a recipe of technologies that were already available in a game theoretical perfect way, like a master chess player being able to see moves ahead of attackers and build systems to make them improbable. It's just so eloquent and beautiful, and it brings a tear to my eye.
Oh, it is worth mentioning. It is reminiscent of Linux, the Linux operating system, where Linus didn't Linus didn't make the individual tools. They were Richard Stallman's tools. Linus put them together into an operating system. So it was his ability to combine things that was his genius, where it was Stallman's idea of free software in the first place. Just like Satoshi here is able to take all of these ideas, such as Hashcash and Merkle trees, like you said, Josh, and combine them into what became Bitcoin. Okay, Max, go ahead. Tell us about the conclusion, the end of the white paper.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? It's not that Satoshi was this genius who invented a bunch of stuff. Rather, he was a genius who combined a bunch of stuff, and he built upon the work of others. He's standing on the shoulders of giants, and so are we all, right? So this is quite the novelty and the humble aspects of Satoshi is that he was not, hey, look at what I've built, but rather, hey, look what I've accumulated and how I have morphed all this information and knowledge into something that, as Josh said, is beautiful in its holistic combination. And it's just breathtaking. And I agree with Josh in the sense that once you've read it, you kind of start getting it, and then you go back and read it again. And honestly, for me, explaining Bitcoin, always the first sentence is the most difficult. And I cannot imagine how Satoshi did it, because he had nothing, right? He was saying these first words. He was writing this white paper as the true beginning of Bitcoin. Of course, building upon the history of digital currencies and cypherpunk ethos in general. But it just is such a tremendous difficult task of putting pretty much the entire idea of Bitcoin in 9 pages. It's insane if you think about it like that. And cool thing is that although Satoshi started this Bitcoin journey here exactly 10 years ago, well, it is now 10 years since, and we have built on top, and we have accumulated additional work on top of his Genesis white paper, so to say. And that is what makes Bitcoin so fun, is that it is not just a one-off thing. It's this ever expanding, ever increasing, ever growing a chain of not just blocks, but of information in general. And this information that he has released with the white paper, and that we are continuing to accumulate upon, is going to be here not just for the near future, but for the long run. This is truly breathtaking and mind blowing, and it's so much fun working on it. And as we are all Satoshi, I have to say, good job, us. We did a good job.
It is impressive how much he fits into such a small space using only the 9 pages, even answering some large questions such as addressing the 51% attack and, of course, providing his solution to preventing double spending. But this is pretty much it. It ties the paper together. It is a neat paper, like you're saying, because it can be understood by novices as well as advanced people. And let's remember there's a little bit of Amazonian trickery going on here, because Satoshi probably already has the software at this point. He has a rudimentary version of this system. He knows that he can run it, and that he's writing this paper probably after or during describing the software. And he releases the paper first. A couple of months later, he releases the software. It's almost more impressive that he was able to do it so quickly, that he was able to plan all of this. And then, of course, he was able to disappear. He worked on the software publicly with Hal Finney and others for a short amount of time, and then he disappeared. It's been 10 years. No one knows who Satoshi is. It's still a pretty big mystery and a pretty impressive disappearing act, and it also takes a certain kind of character to give this away. As we're learning at many of the conferences these days, Satoshi's invention of the blockchain was the real invention here, not the solving double spending or this precise and concise paper in which he puts it together. We'll have to see if that turns out. I still think that it seems like the solution that he's developed here is specifically for, like he says here, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, a way to send value around, and that it works perfectly for that, and it's very difficult to find other uses for it. But we're looking at the white paper here. Anything you guys want to say in conclusion here as we end this show? To Max, you with us?
Well, yeah, you summed it up perfectly, Thomas, here. And it is, again, just a breathtaking white paper that is standing on the shoulders of giants, right? It's quoting stuff from 10, 20 years ago at that time. And of course, some of these cryptographers, especially Adam Back, are still heavily involved in Bitcoin, and it is a ongoing thing ever still. So not just did Satoshi stand on the shoulders of giants, but now we stand on the shoulders of Satoshi, and it's upon us to continue with these novel ideas and this incredible technology and make it ever more beautiful. And this is our task, as I see it, is to spread this information and to continue accumulating proof of work on top of Satoshi's work and on top of all the work before us. So if you think you're late to Bitcoin now that it's been 10 years, well, think again, because you're absolutely not. You are here at the precisely right moment that you need to be here. And take the opportunity, be active, and continue accumulating the proof of work, and continue not just making a name for yourself, but building something that is truly liberating for humankind in general. So that is not just why work on the Bitcoin base layer is important, but as Josh is doing work on the Lightning Network is so beautiful, because it doesn't stop there. It is ever expanding and ever increasing. And for pretty much everyone who is interested, there's a lot of stuff to do, a lot of problems to fix, and a lot of novel ideas to further. So absolutely, it's been a pleasure these last 10 years, and I am so much looking forward to the next 10 years. Thank you very much.
And Josh, in conclusion, what would you like to say about the white paper?
You know, what Satoshi invented was the ability for us to have true digital assets that can't be copied. So it's for me to be able to send you something and you know that I don't have it anymore. And I think the scope of what that means is so huge, especially to the money markets, especially to the banking system, and to governments in general. And so the disappearance of what you talked about, Robert, Thomas, was that the disappearance of Satoshi was another stroke of genius. I mean, a lot of people, they sort of, you know, they will see headlines like, oh, you know, the head of the Federal Reserve doesn't like Bitcoin. Yeah, well, no shit. I mean, it's Bitcoin, right? This is what Satoshi thought actually would come down a lot harder. And I'm pretty sure it would have. If he was the inventor, they would have trumped him out. They would have pulled him out of the bushes, probably be accused of some awful crimes, and put his name down and his persona, crush his persona. And so then people would sort of ridicule the idea. And he really wanted to, or she, or they wanted to keep that clean, keep the information clean of human imperfection in terms of ego. And I think this was not only a very impressive thing to do, but also a sacrifice in terms of what he could potentially do afterwards. I mean, being known as the inventor of a revolution or an evolution in the entire economic financial system is a huge boon for one's career, especially as a cryptographer. So I think you know, I really you know, I take my hat off to the person responsible for this white paper for doing that, because I think it was an integral part of releasing the white paper, is working on it, getting it going, and then just retracting back into the bushes like Homer Simpson.
I agree, Josh. I don't think we recognize Satoshi and the genius of the disappearance enough. It almost sounds religious when I talk about it, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think we should run away from this Bitcoin maximalism. It seems to me if you've got the best founder, you've got the best white paper, you've got the best scaling solution, that maybe you do have the best currency and the best coin. If we look at TCP/IP, it bent, but it didn't break. We still use TCP/IP. Even if we can get that IP4 thing running, we can get more IP addresses, and we can stretch that bending system out into the future. Sometimes there is a reason to go with the first one. Sometimes there is an advantage to going first, and Bitcoin has all of these things. So definitely a huge shout out to Satoshi or the Satoshi team or whoever it might be for having the genius to not end up like Prometheus. Remember, Prometheus brought fire to man, and in return for this great gift, the gods chained him to a rock, and a bird pecked out his liver every day. Every day his liver would grow back, and the bird would come back and peck out his liver. It wasn't until Hercules freed him as one of the labors of Hercules that Prometheus was released from his torment for bringing fire from the gods and giving it to man. Remember, fire allowed man to live without the gods. Man could do what he wanted, just like people can do what they want with Bitcoin now. Just a reminder, everyone, to give us a thumbs up and a share. That really helps people find the show. We are running a tally coin for donations for having me return from my Europe trip. The internet said, hey, you should go to more conferences. So I went to a conference in Frankfurt, and tomorrow I'm going to a conference in Malta. So I'm filming interviews there. I'm uploading them to the World Crypto Network. Max and I did 17 interviews in Riga. We did 66 interviews in Prague. We did about 4 interviews in Frankfurt, maybe 4 tomorrow. That's a lot of interviews, plus last year's interviews from Prague, which I've cut up and put in a schedule here on the World Crypto Network. That's over 100 interviews live from Europe between this year and last year. So if you'd like to donate, if just 20 people donated $100, the fundraiser would be over. So step up and become one of the 20. Send $100 in Bitcoin to the address on your screen right now. You'll also notice we're using tallyco.in as our free fundraiser partner here. Tallycoin simply uses your Bitcoin address. Tallycoin doesn't get paid a cut of my fundraiser or anyone's fundraiser, and you can use Tallycoin. All you need is a Bitcoin address and a goal. If you want to get a guitar or a new microphone or whatever you need, maybe you need a flight home or some money for some Airbnbs, you can put together a Tallycoin, put the amount of money that you need out there, and if you're fortunate, people will donate to you. So we hope that everyone enjoyed this special reading of the Bitcoin white paper. It's only 9 pages long. You could even read it yourself after this show ends. It's called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, written by Satoshi Nakamoto, released 10 years ago today on October 31st, 2008. Now it's October 31st, 2018, and we're signing off for you on the World Crypto Network. Be sure to check out the archives, and we've got new interviews every day. Until next time, bye-bye.